Have you ever asked yourself, why do I have fewer friends than others? It's not because you're closed off. It's not because you're not interesting enough. It's because you're tired of relationships that only exist to fill time. One day you suddenly realize you're always the one who listens, but no one ever asks what you're thinking. You're present in many conversations, yet you feel the loneliest when surrounded by a crowd. And then you ask yourself, am I doing something wrong? Society teaches us this. The more friends you have, the more successful you are. That being constantly connected is the measure of a person's worth. But what few people tell you is this. The fewer friends you have, the deeper you understand yourself. The more selective you are in connection, the harder it is to be manipulated. Stoicism doesn't teach you to detach from the world. It teaches you to choose who is worthy of entering your inner world. And sometimes, one right person is worth more than 100 loud ones. In this video, we won't talk about how to make more friends. We'll go on a deeper journey to understand why the absence of friendship is not a weakness, but a sign of awakening, of silent strength, and of inner depth. Not everyone is brave enough to be alone without feeling empty. 1. You hold high standards of character. There are people who pass through your life like the wind, carrying promises, laughter, and moments that seem sincere only to vanish, leaving nothing but a hollow aftertaste. But you've lost interest in such easy connections. You no longer want to smile when you don't feel joy, nod when your gut feels unsettled, or pretend to agree just to avoid being labeled as difficult. You once tried living that way, blending into the crowd, making yourself more acceptable, proving you knew how to connect. But the more you did, the more you felt yourself dissolve, realizing that the price of acceptance is often self-betrayal. At some point, you began to look around and notice that people talk about each other more than they speak truth to each other. They share smiles but hide envy. They speak of honesty but live by calculation. And in the middle of that chaos, something in you grew cold. Not because you became bitter, but because you began to see clearly what society calls friendship no longer holds the meaning it once did. It has been diluted by self-interest, by the need to be seen, by the fear of isolation. You no longer look for people who make you laugh. You look for those who make you believe. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Associate with those who help you become better, and stay away from those who make you lose your self-respect." You don't keep that quote to remember it. You live it. Because over the years, you've come to see a person's value doesn't lie in how many people they can make like them, but in how well they can remain themselves amidst insincere relationships. The ones you once called close have sometimes been the first to stab you in silence, and the quiet ones at the edges have often been the first to reach for your hand when you fall. So you've learned to observe. You've learned to silently listen to how someone speaks about others, because eventually they will speak about you the same way. You've been called too hard to please. People say your standards are too high, that you should ease up, be less rigid, be more flexible to fit in. But you know that moral flexibility is not wisdom, it's silent surrender. You don't need many people to understand you. You just need a few who don't make you pretend. You'd rather be silent in a crowd than speak and laugh with people you don't trust. In others' eyes, you may look like a loner. But within yourself, you know it's freedom. Seneca once said, "No one can live happily who lives in conflict with their conscience." You've sat through enough hollow conversations to understand that every time you fake a smile, every time you give in to keep the peace, you lose a little piece of your inner purity, and so you stopped. Not because you hate the world, but because you've begun to love your own peace more. You've come to value honesty in relationships, even when it costs you solitude. Maybe you only have 2 or 3 real friends, but in their eyes, you never have to explain yourself. You are allowed to just be nothing more, nothing less. People like you are rarely adored by the masses, because you reflect the very falseness they don't want to confront. You don't play the unspoken game of praise in exchange for flattery. You don't respond to manipulation with forced smiles. And so, your silence makes others uneasy. They don't understand you, but they cannot dismiss you either. The stillness within you makes the noisy ones feel small. And that is power. The modern world teaches people how to attract, but not how to respect. Everyone wants more friends, but few ask, "Am I worthy of being one?" You've seen too many people lose themselves just to avoid being left behind, and you chose the opposite path, to be misunderstood, to be seen as cold, just to protect the purity of your soul. That isn't loneliness. That is spiritual discipline. Because Stoics don't keep few friends to show how different they are. They keep few because they know the value of inner safety. Better to walk alone in silence than with those who stir noise within your heart. Better to have a quiet dinner alone than sit at a table full of empty words. Your selectiveness isn't arrogance, it's respect. Respect for yourself and for the true meaning of friendship. When you reject toxic relationships, you lose no one, you're simply returning to yourself. Your solitude is not a social failure. It is a silent declaration that you will not let others define your character. And if the price is loneliness, you're willing to pay it. Because you know, no one is truly alone as long as they still stand with themselves. 2. You feel at peace when you're alone. There are quiet afternoons when it begins to rain lightly, and you walk alone on a wet sidewalk, no earbuds, no messages, no one calling. Yet you don't feel lost. On the contrary, you feel more connected to yourself. In a noisy world where everyone is rushing toward connection, the silence you've found feels like a privilege. Others may look at you and ask, "Don't you feel lonely?" But how could they understand that? To you, those moments aren't empty. They're the space where your truest self can fully exist. There's a truth only those who've lived with loneliness for a long time can understand. Solitude doesn't come from the absence of people, but from the burden of living against yourself in the middle of a crowd. You've tried to fit in. You've tried to be more likable, more approachable. You've walked into gatherings where everyone was laughing, but no one truly listening. And you came home feeling even emptier than before. That's when you began to wonder, is being alone really that scary, or have we just been taught to believe so? Epictetus once taught, "He who is not capable of being alone has never truly been friends with himself." You reflect on this and realize that time spent alone is when you live most honestly. It's when you don't have to play a role, don't have to say what pleases others, don't have to adjust your tone, your words, or your face. It's when your thoughts slow down, your senses sharpen, and you finally hear the quiet voice inside, usually drowned out by the noise of others. You realize your own presence is the most complete thing you have. When others feel empty because no one texts them, you feel relief. When they find it strange that you sit alone at a cafe, you feel safe. When they try to fill the silence with a call, a hangout, or some excitement, you find in that very silence something real, something unfiltered, unperformed, unjudged. You begin to slow down, stop checking everyone's schedules, stop dragging yourself into gatherings just to feel like you belong. You understand there is a rarer kind of belonging, the kind where you belong to yourself. There are nights when you turn off all the lights, sit alone in the dark, and let your thoughts drift. Not to solve a problem, but simply to listen. To touch the emotions others avoid, the vague sadness, the nameless emptiness, the unanswered questions. People fear these things, but you let them pass through you like wind, without resisting, without avoiding, because you know, only by facing those silent voids can a person grow emotionally. And you have faced them. You don't need to be surrounded by sound to feel life is meaningful. You find meaning in things others overlook. The dripping of water, the whisper of wind through a window, the scent of old books, a piece of instrumental music. You're not isolating yourself from the world. You're simply refusing to be swept into it unconsciously. You choose where you show up, whom you let in. Most of all, you choose the empty spaces where you can restore your inner peace, the kind no one else can give you but yourself. Marcus Aurelius spent much of his time contemplating alone, not because he hated people, but because he needed to return to himself after being torn by duty and noise. In meditations, he didn't write to teach others, he wrote to remind himself. And you are the same. You don't need an audience for your inner monologues. You don't post them online, don't share them with others. You just need a quiet corner to sit and ask yourself, what did I live in alignment with today? The ability to be alone without feeling lonely is the clearest sign that your inner power is growing. Because only when you no longer fear your own company can you face the world without needing armor. You don't need appointments to feel valuable. You don't need to talk much to prove you're interesting. You don't need anyone's validation, because you know there is a quiet kind of depth in those who dare to walk into their own soul without fear. And when you're strong enough to enjoy an evening with no one calling, no one asking, then you know you're not lonely. You're simply walking a path. Few dare to walk the path where silence is not the absence of life, but the evidence of depth. The Stoic knows that having few people around isn't a tragedy sometimes. It's proof that you're already whole, and that is enough. 3. You understand that quality always outweighs quantity. There was a time you believed the ideal life was one surrounded by people, endless calls, constant messages, parties one after another, a packed schedule that looked like a certificate of a rich life. But one day, when the noise faded, you realized what truly matters isn't how many people say your name, but whether someone is willing to sit beside you in the moments when no one else is still smiling. You once had dozens of acquaintances who knew your name, but none who truly understood you. They knew how you liked your coffee, what genre of music you enjoyed, or which words to use to start a conversation, but they didn't know you spent sleepless nights over a single careless remark. They knew you were good with people, knew how to joke, knew you were easy to like, but none of them knew why you sometimes disappeared without a word, and that taught you a hard truth. Many relationships are loud but strangely empty. People say you've closed yourself off, but you haven't. You've simply stopped opening your door to those who never truly intended to enter, those who knock only when they're lonely, not when they're thinking of you. You started to reflect and realized there's a clear difference between having many connections and having a real relationship. Between having hundreds of online followers and one person who notices your sadness even when you're smiling. Seneca once said, "A true friend enriches life more than any fortune." You didn't believe that at first until life hit hard, and suddenly all those names you once called friends went silent. Not because they were cruel, but because they had never truly stepped into the parts of you that weren't on display. When there was nothing left for them to laugh at, to benefit from, to cling to, you became invisible. And in that invisibility, you saw clearly, one honest relationship can be enough to replace a crowd of counterfeit ones. Since then, you no longer crave crowds. You don't need to attend every event or maintain every small contact just to feel in the loop. You've become selective not out of arrogance, but because you understand your emotions deserve protection. Every conversation is an exchange of energy. Every moment spent listening to someone is time you'll never get back. And if you must choose, you'd rather spend that time on one genuine dialogue than on 5 hollow meetings. Quality isn't a concept for comparison, it's a principle for living. You don't need many who understand, you just need a few who don't judge. You don't need universal approval, you just need one person who believes in you when the world doesn't. You don't need a group of best friends just to post photos. You need one quiet gaze you can lean into when you're tired without having to explain. These things don't come from numbers. They only come when you're brave enough to walk away from the noise, to choose the few things truly worth keeping. Marcus Aurelius, revered by an entire empire, still chose solitude to pen his deepest reflections. He understood that greatness isn't in how many bow before you, but in whether you can stand alone without trembling. Clarity, purity of mind, and sincerity in relationships can only grow when we choose depth over breadth. And you're learning that too. Learning not to measure your worth by how many invites you receive. Learning to be content with 3 true friends instead of feeling empty among 30 who don't understand you. Learning to sit with someone who shows up when no one is watching instead of those who arrive only when you shine. You're learning to say no, learning to walk away, learning to stay silent when your heart doesn't align. Because you understand, the true quality of a relationship isn't in how often you meet, but in how deeply you connect. And one day, when you look back, you'll see the most meaningful things in life are always the rare but deep ones. An old book that makes you cry. A friend you rarely see but who understands your core. A quiet space no one intrudes where you finally hear your own thoughts. That is quality. And that is silent fullness, reachable only by those who dare to say no to quantity. 4. You no longer need others to validate your worth. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from lacking company, but from constantly needing someone to affirm your worth. You used to live in that state. When you did something good, you looked around for approving eyes. When you made a hard decision, you waited for praise. And when no one noticed, when no one responded, you began to doubt yourself, as if silence from the world meant you had done something wrong. But then came a day when you grew tired of living like a report, waiting for approval. And you started asking, is there a way to live without needing permission? No one told you that your value doesn't lie in applause, but in the stillness you maintain after the stage lights go out. No one said that what's right doesn't need the crowd's agreement. That kindness doesn't need to be captured, shared, and applauded to be meaningful. You began to realize that the deepest parts of you, the most sincere acts, are often the ones no one sees, no one knows, and no one acknowledges. And yet you continue them daily, like a ritual between you and your own conscience. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Stand up straight, not because someone lifts you, but because you have chosen not to bow." At first you thought it was just poetic stoicism, but then you lived through enough seasons of praise followed by abandonment. Moments where you did right but were misunderstood, times you gave but went unseen, and you accepted this truth. If your worth depends on others, then you never truly owned it. People can strip away your reputation, forget your name, dismiss your efforts, but no one can touch your inner integrity unless you let them. So you began to live differently. You stopped explaining. You stopped sharing your depths just to receive a shallow nod. You remained kind but didn't need recognition. You kept striving but didn't wait for compliments. You kept walking but no longer waited for applause. And strangely enough, the less you needed affirmation, the more grounded you became. You started to see. True strength comes from within, from how you remain standing in the storm, not from how you make others think you're strong. Epictetus once said, "If you wish to be loved, you will become a slave to those who love you." And truly, the craving for approval is a sweet kind of slavery, but one that quietly erodes your freedom. It makes you say what you don't believe, do what you don't value, stay in relationships that no longer fit just to keep someone's attention. But when you learn to love yourself without needing proof, you begin to break free from every invisible chain. And from there, you begin to see others differently too. You stop measuring people by how recognized they are. Instead, you begin to notice the silent ones who do what's right, even when no one sees. You see virtue in those who speak little, share less, but live with quiet discipline and a loyal heart to what they believe in. They are not flashy, but they are steady. They are not loud, but they are deep, and you know they are like you. From someone who once craved attention, you begin to cherish selective invisibility, because you understand. Even without validation, you are still you. Without applause, your actions still hold meaning. Without being liked, you still live with value. That is when you become unshakable. Not because you're indifferent, but because you've found that the source of your worth doesn't lie out there. It lies in each quiet decision you make. Each time you forgive yourself, lift yourself up, and carry on in silence. And when you stand amidst a world still full of noise, full of lights, full of stages, you simply smile. Because you've already chosen where the true light is. Not the one others look at, but the one where you no longer have to perform to be accepted. You are yourself, and that is enough. 5. You choose truth over social performance. There is a very particular kind of exhaustion. It doesn't come from work, nor from physical exertion, but from having to become someone else every time you step into a crowd. Every word must be measured, every smile calculated, every reaction tailored so you don't seem out of place. Slowly you realize you're not afraid of others. You're afraid of losing the role you thought was necessary to be accepted. But then comes a point where you no longer want to act. Not out of bitterness, but because you are simply tired. In crowded rooms, you once tried hard to blend in, just to avoid being excluded from conversations. But the harder you tried, the more alienated you felt. People talked about things you found uninteresting, laughed at jokes you didn't find funny, and you laughed along as a form of emotional survival. But you began to ask, what, if anything, is still real in the way I'm living? And your awakening didn't come from a major event, but from a quiet moment when you realized you no longer saw yourself in the relationships you were maintaining. Truth isn't glamorous. It's often rough, unpopular, and easily misunderstood. But in silence, you begin to return to yourself. You stop trying to make a good impression. You accept that some people won't like you not because you're bad, but because you've stopped trying to please them. You come to understand, if a relationship requires pretending to sustain, then it was never truly yours. And the greatest courage in life is not confrontation. It is daring to live honestly, even when that honesty isolates you. Seneca once wrote, "A person who lives truthfully may have few friends, but they will never have to perform in their own life." That sentence isn't an excuse for loneliness. It's a reminder that the number of relationships doesn't define your worth. How you live within them does. You may have just 3 friends, but you won't need to play a role around them. No exaggeration, no fake laughter, no need to prove anything. You are simply yourself, and that is enough. The modern world favors appearance over essence. People rush to build a perfect self online, paint a flawless life, portray themselves as social, charming, energetic, as if those are the requirements for existence. But you've lived through those performative years, and you've learned the true cost of social acting is the loss of self-awareness. You stop asking, do they like me? And start asking, am I being honest with myself in this relationship? When you choose honesty, you'll find yourself speaking less. Not because you've withdrawn, but because you no longer feel the need to fill silence with empty words. You begin to retreat from groups where your presence feels like a role, and you feel more at peace even as the number of friends diminishes. But what you gain is the feeling of no longer needing to retreat from yourself when you walk into a room. Marcus Aurelius once reminded, "Do not let your soul become someone else's property." And living truthfully is how you protect that precious possession. You stop seeking validation. You stop forcing jokes. You no longer need agreement to feel accepted. You quietly hold on to the most authentic part of yourself and allow it to naturally attract the few who are truly meant to walk beside you. You are no longer a participant in the social theater, but someone who has stepped off stage to sit with themselves. And in that space, in simplicity, in quiet, without the need to prove, you begin to find the most genuine connections. Not many, but deep. Not loud, but without contradiction. And that is the sign you've chosen the right side. The side of truth. The side of peace, the side of you. 6. You understand the real cost of a relationship. There was a time you believed, the more relationships you have, the richer your life becomes. That other people's presence proves your value. But then you grew up and started to feel tired. Not because you lacked the energy to meet others, but because you began to understand that every conversation, every nod, every moment spent absorbing someone else's pain costs something, and if you're not careful, you'll trade your inner peace for connections that don't truly matter. Friendships, family ties, even casual connections, none of them are free. Though not measured in money, they all carry a cost. The cost of time, of attention, of genuine care. As you mature, time becomes more precious. A quiet evening reading, a morning without anyone calling your name, an hour where no explanation is needed, these become rare treasures worth protecting. And from that understanding, you become more careful in deciding who is allowed into your mental world. There are people you held on to simply out of familiarity or history. But then you realize, keeping a relationship that no longer has connection is like watering a dead plant. There's no life left, only habit, and habit cannot nourish the soul. You begin to learn to let go, not out of selfishness, but because you understand. The feeling of being drained every time you meet someone should never be the default in friendship. A real connection should bring you back to yourself, not pull you further away. Stoicism never encourages isolation, but it teaches you the value of discernment. Marcus Aurelius once warned, we must be cautious about who we allow into our minds, just as a guard watches the city gates. Because if you don't choose, someone else will choose for you. Complaints, blame, irrational anger, and endless emotional needs will invade you until you forget where your own boundaries are. And by then, you're no longer yourself. You've become a reflection of those taking up too much space in your life. You once believed that just being there was good enough. But in the end, you realize being present isn't enough. It's how present you are that matters. Not with 10 people at once, but with the few who truly deserve your undivided attention. And to make that possible, you need to cut back. Cut the invitations you accept only out of politeness. Cut the texts you don't feel like answering. Cut the ties you maintain just to avoid guilt. Because the greatest cost isn't time, it's the dishonest presence you bring into relationships that no longer fit you. Seneca said, we are not poor because we lack friends, but because we've invested in those who don't bring real value. Invest, that is the key. You invest emotions, trust, listening, and sometimes even your most wounded parts. A good friend isn't the one who's always there when you're happy, but the one who shows up and doesn't leave you emptier afterward. And once you understand that, you no longer fear leaving old circles, saying no to invitations, or needing space to heal. Maturity in relationships doesn't lie in how many people you keep, but in how many parts of yourself remain intact after giving. You begin to realize, not everyone who needs you is someone you should show up for, and not everyone labeled a friend is actually good for you. Some relationships should end with gratitude. Some people should remain beautiful memories, and some connections must be released so both can be free. And when you choose carefully, keep rightly, and let go cleanly, you're not just clearing your life, you're honoring the people who truly matter. Because only when you're no longer depleted by toxic ties do you have enough energy to be a real friend, present, wholehearted, and responsible. That's when you understand. Less is not lack, less is depth. And depth is what makes a relationship strong enough to endure. 7. You choose peace over chaotic pleasures. There are nights when you leave a party, sit in your car with music still echoing behind your ears, but inside, everything is silent. Not because you're sad, not because someone hurt you, simply because you no longer feel like you belong in noisy places. Conversations without depth, forced laughter, the exhausting effort to keep up small talk just to avoid awkward silence, all of it slowly begins to feel out of place. It's not that you're rejecting joy, it's that you're beginning to realize peace is something you can't find in chaos. When you were younger, you thought being invited out, getting messages every night, and being constantly asked to hang out was proof that you were loved. But as you grew older, you began to see some people don't call because they care, they call because you're easy to be around. Some parties invite you not because they want to hear you, but because you won't disrupt the mood. And there were times you showed up then quietly left, and no one even noticed when you were gone. Crowds do not equal connection, and that truth became clear. Chaos may temporarily distract you from your emptiness, but it can never fill it. Friends who gossip endlessly, relationships revolving around drama, hangouts where you fake a laugh just to keep pace. All of it quietly disconnects you from yourself. You find yourself drifting further from the inner stillness that once anchored you, and in return, you gain nothing but an invisible fatigue after every social interaction. Sometimes you ask yourself, why does connection leave me so drained? And the answer comes slowly but clearly. Because it's not real. Epictetus once said, if someone brings too much noise into your life, retreat into your own silence. That silence is not escape. It is a form of protection not from others, but from becoming dissolved into things that are not truly yours. You no longer feel guilty declining an invitation. You no longer need a packed weekend to feel alive. Your presence is no longer tied to pleasing others, but to preserving the inner calm you've worked hard to build. Sometimes you choose to walk alone in the late afternoon instead of attending a lively gathering. Sometimes you choose to read rather than join an evening where the conversations revolve around those not present. And sometimes you choose silence over playing the role of the pleasant one in a group that buzzes with energy you no longer resonate with. That's not a sign of isolation. It's a sign of someone who knows the value of mental peace. Marcus Aurelius emphasized, the chaos outside cannot touch you unless you allow it inside. And you begin to see that clearly in every small decision, to stay or to leave, to speak or remain silent, to be present or absent. You no longer let others dictate what you must do to be considered normal. Your version of normal no longer includes being busy, cheerful, or social. It is defined by the clarity you feel after each interaction. If a place disorients you, it's not your place. And if a person unsettles you, they're not someone to keep. You no longer chase excitement. What you seek now is balance. No noise, no climax. Just a conversation that doesn't weigh you down with pretense. A friend you don't have to second guess. A space where you don't have to be on guard. These are your new definitions of joy, light, lasting, and free of emotional aftermath. I used to believe that loneliness was a form of failure. That sitting alone at a cafe, having no one to call at midnight, or not belonging to a go-everywhere-together group meant I had lived the wrong way. But the further I went, the more I realized. Some relationships full of people can leave you feeling emptier than silence ever could. And some quiet moments alone are exactly where you hear, for the first time, what your soul truly needs. The absence of friends is not always a void. Sometimes it's the space you intentionally create to sit with things that matter more. Character, peace, self-respect, and discernment. No one teaches you this in school. But Stoic philosophy always whispers, solitude is not an enemy. It's a teacher that forces you to face yourself instead of hiding in society's noise. A teacher that helps you treasure those who show up for you, not for convenience, but for truth. I don't need many relationships. I just need a few where I feel safe to be fully myself. I don't want to be the center of every party. I want to be the kind of person who can leave quietly and still feel whole on the inside. And I'm not afraid if one day it's just me and the peace I chose to keep. Because that's not a loss, that's freedom. If this video helped you see your relationships in a new light, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's next. And always remember, you don't need a crowd around you, you just need enough quiet to hear your own voice clearly. That's where real strength begins. See you in the next video.